You know, looking back at it now, sitting here with a cold brew in my hand and the grease finally scrub it out from under my fingernails. Well, mostly scrub it out. It's funny how life hinges on these microscopic moments, these split-second decisions that you make when you're too tired to think straight. It all started at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. The kind of morning where the fog off the bay in Port Haven is so thick you can taste the salt and diesel on your tongue. And my phone. That cracked, outdated brick of a phone. It just wouldn't stop buzzing on the nightstand. I'm Marcus. By the way, Marcus Thorne, and if you saw me on the street, you'd probably cross to the other side. I'm a big guy, 6'4", beard, usually full of sawdust or motor oil, walking with a slight limp from a turbine explosion back in my engineering days. But that morning, waking up in the cramped apartment above my shop, Thorne's Auto and Salvage, all I felt was the crushing weight of being a failure. My little girl, Sophie, she's 8, going on 80 with that wisdom in her eyes. She was sleeping in the next room, curled up under 3 blankets because I couldn't afford to run the heater past midnight. And the guilt of that. Man, it eats at you, gnaws at your gut worse than hunger, because I promised her mom. I promised Alina on her deathbed that Sophie would never know what it meant to be cold. Yet here we were. I ignored the phone at first, thinking it was just another bill collector. They call it all hours now, relentless, like sharks smelling blood in the water. But then I saw the caller ID, and my heart stopped, literally skipped a beat, because it wasn't a number, it was a name that everyone in Port Haven knew but nobody actually spoke to unless they were being sued or fired. Kensington Estate. Yeah, that Kensington. But to understand why the matriarch of the biggest shipping empire on the East Coast was calling a grease monkey like me before the sun came up, we gotta rewind about 12 hours, back to the storm that flooded the lower docks and nearly washed my shop into the Atlantic. It was raining sideways, apocalyptic rain, and I was closing up, dead tired, having spent 6 hours wrestling with a transmission on a '04 Civic for Mrs. Higgins, knowing full well she couldn't pay me until her Social Security check came in next week. But what was I gonna do? Let a 70-year-old woman walk to the grocery store in the rain? So I'm locking the bay doors. The wind is howling like a banshee, and suddenly I see these headlights cutting through the downpour, blindingly bright LED beams that cost more than my entire tool chest, and this sleek, silver vintage Aston Martin, a DB5, a ghost of a car, beautiful and utterly out of place, comes sputtering down the alleyway, engine coughing like it's dying of consumption. Now, my shop is in the rust belt of the docks, okay? People don't drive DB5 south down here unless they're lost or looking for trouble. And judging by the way the car lurched and died right in front of my gate, it was definitely lost. I pulled my hood up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out into the deluge, banging on the driver's window, expecting some arrogant businessman who took a wrong turn trying to find the yacht club. But the glass rolls down, and there's this girl, couldn't have been more than 19, clutching the steering wheel with white knuckles, her eyes wide, terrified, mascara running down her face like war paint. This was Isabella Izzy, as I later learned, and she wasn't just scared of the storm. She was looking at the rearview mirror like the devil himself was tailgating her. I think I killed it," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "Please, you have to help me, my mother. If I don't get this car back before she lands, she destroy me. Now look, I've got a rule cash up front for strangers, especially ones driving cars worth $500,000, but there was something in her tone, a desperation, that I recognized, the same tone I hear in my own voice when I'm begging the bank for just one more week on the loan. "Pop the hood," I yelled over the wind, not even asking for her name. She fumbled with the latch and I got under there, shielding the engine with my body. And it was a mess. Whoever worked on this classic beauty last was a butcher, probably some high-end dealership mechanic who only knew how to plug in a diagnostic computer and didn't know the soul of a carbureted engine. The fuel line was cracked, spewing gas onto the hot manifold one spark, and this girl would have been a Roman candle, so I didn't have time to order parts. Didn't have time to be professional. I just went into survival mode, grabbed a roll of high-temp industrial tape and a spare hose clamp from my pocket, and I MacGyvered that thing right there in the rain. I'm working. My hands are numb. Water is soaking through my boots, and she's standing there holding the flashlight, shivering in this thin designer dress, and I ask her, "Why are you down here, kid? This ain't a place for tourists." And she looks at me, really looks at me, and says, "I was trying to find the ocean ... Not the one we see from the cliffs, but the real one, the messy one." And that struck me, you know. It was profound in a weird, sad way. I got the engine purring. Again, well, maybe not purring, but growling healthily, and I slammed the hood, wiped the grease on my pants, and told her, "Get out of here. Go back up the hill, and for God's sake, tell your mechanic that a fuel line isn't a suggestion." She tried to hand me a credit card, black titanium, heavy as a stone, but I pushed it away, not out of pride, but because I knew if I swiped that card, it would leave a paper trail, and looking at her, she clearly didn't want to be found. "Just go," I said, "and drive slow." She drove off, disappearing into the rain, and I went upstairs, checked on Sophie, ate a cold can of beans for dinner, and passed out. Until the phone rang at 4:17 a.m. So, back to the call. "Mr. Thorne?" The voice on the other end was like liquid nitrogen, smooth, cold, and burning. "This is Eleanor Kensington. My driver is outside. You have 20 minutes. She didn't ask. She didn't explain. She just hung up. I looked out the window, and sure enough, a black SUV, armored, tinted, looking more like a tank than a car, was idling next to the dumpster. Panic set in. Did I break the car? Did the girl crash? Was I being sued for malpractice? But I looked at Sophie sleeping there, so peaceful, and I knew I had to face the dragon, because if the Kensingtons wanted to crush me, they wouldn't send a car. They'd just send a foreclosure notice. I woke up my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, asked her to watch Sophie for an hour. Bless that woman's heart. She didn't even ask why. Just came over in her bathrobe, and I went down, climbed into the back of that SUV, and let me tell you, the leather seats cost more than my entire education. We drove up the Golden Mile, past the gates I'd only ever seen from the delivery van, winding up the cliffs until we reached the estate. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress of glass and steel, overlooking the churning ocean, cold and imposing, just like its owner. Was led into a study that was bigger than my shop, walls lined with books that looked like they'd never been opened, and behind a desk made of dark, polished mahogany sat Eleanor Kensington. She was older than I expected, maybe in her 60s, but sharp, with eyes that scanned me like a barcode reader, assessing my value, my threat level, my net worth, which she probably calculated was negative in about 3 seconds. "You touched my husband's car," she said, not looking up from a file she was reading. "I fixed your husband's car," I corrected, standing my ground, because my dad always taught me that if you're gonna be poor, you better be proud. "Fuel line was shot. It was a fire hazard. Frankly, you should sue whoever serviced it last." She stopped. She slowly closed the file, looked up, and for a second, the air in the room got so heavy I could barely breathe. "The last person who serviced it," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "was my husband right before he died 3 years ago. Nobody has been allowed to touch it since." Oh no, I swallowed hard. I didn't know. The girl ... Isabella. She was stuck. It was storming ... Isabella. Eleanor stood up, walking around the desk, and I realized she was tiny, but she projected a shadow 10 feet tall. "Isabella is forbidden from driving that car. She is forbidden from leaving the estate without security. Do you know why, Mr. Thorne?" I shook my head, feeling like I'd walked into a minefield. "Because 15 years ago, my eldest son was taken from a roadside, just like the one you found my daughter on," she whispered, the pain in her voice so raw it felt intrusive to hear. He was never found. So when my security team told me the DB5 was missing and the GPS pinged at a salvage yard in the Rust Belt, I thought history was repeating itself. She walked right up to me, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive tea and steel. But then the car came back. And Isabella came back. And she told me a giant of a man with grease on his face fixed the unfixable and sent her home without taking a dime. She called you a guardian angel in a flannel shirt. I shifted my weight, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just turned a wrench, ma'am, that's all. Nobody just does anything in my world, Mr. Thorne," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Everyone has an angle. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. I had your background checked while you were in the car. Marcus Thorne, ex-aerospace engineer. Dismissed after an industrial accident. Not your fault, but you took the fall for your team. Widower. One daughter. Drowning in debt. Your shop is 2 months away from bankruptcy." I felt the anger flare up, hot and fast. "If you brought me here to humiliate me, you can save your breath. I'm leaving." I turned to walk out. I really did. I had my hand on the brass doorknob, ready to walk 5 miles back home in my work boots, when she spoke again. "I don't want to humiliate you, Marcus. I want to hire you." I stopped. "Excuse me?" "My fleet," she said, gesturing to the window where I could see a row of limousines, SUVs, and classic cars lined up like soldiers. "We have 20 vehicles on the estate, plus the corporate transport division. The current service contract is with a firm that charges me triple and clearly does shoddy work. I want someone who can fix a fuel line in a rainstorm with duct tape. And integrity, I want you." She slid a contract across the desk. I walked back, picked it up, and looked at the number at the bottom dot. It wasn't just money. It was life. It was Sophie's college fund. It was a new roof. It was paying off the hospital bills that had been suffocating me since Elena died. "There's a catch," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "There's always a catch with folks like you, smart man," she smirked, a dry, humorless expression. "The catch is twofold. 1, you sign a non-disclosure agreement that is tighter than a drum. You see nothing, you hear nothing. And 2, Isabella has expressed a sudden, irritating interest in learning how things work. She claims she wants to be self-sufficient. I don't have time for her rebellions. You will let her shadow you at the shop twice a week. You will teach her that getting her hands dirty isn't romantic, it's hard, miserable work. You will bore her until she quits and goes back to her piano lessons. Do we have a deal?" I looked at the contract. I thought about Sophie's worn-out sneakers. I thought about the drafty windows in our apartment. "I'm not a babysitter, Mrs. Kensington," I grumbled. "No," she replied, sitting back down. "You're a mechanic, so fix my problem." I signed. God help me, I signed, and that's when the real trouble started. Because bringing a Kensington into the Rust Belt is like bringing a lit match into a dynamite factory. I went back to the shop. Told Sophie we were celebrating with pizza that night, extra cheese, the good stuff, and the next day, a shiny black town car dropped Isabella off at my bay doors. She wasn't wearing the dress this time. She was wearing brand new, stiff as board coveralls that looked like she bought them at a costume shop, and she had a toolbox that was probably worth more than my van. "Ready to work, boss," she chirped, looking like a puppy that didn't know it. Was walking into a wolf's den. I threw a rag at her. "Rule number 1, princess, don't call me boss. Rule number 2, if you drop a wrench on your foot, don't cry to mommy, because she pays me to fix cars, not toes." She caught the rag, and for a second, I saw that spark again, the one from the storm. She didn't flinch. She just smiled, a real smile, not the media-trained one. "Deal," she said. For a few weeks. It was okay. Weird, but okay. She was actually A quick learner. She had these delicate pianist fingers that could reach bolts I couldn't touch with my bare paws. We fell into a rhythm. Sophie adored her. Izzy would bring her fancy sketch pads and sit with her while I welded, drawing pictures of the ocean. But I should have known the calm wouldn't last. I should have known that in a town like Port Haven, the divide between the cliff and the docks isn't just a hill, it's a battle line. It was a Friday evening, about a month into the arrangement. I was under the lift, working on the brakes of one of the Kensington Security SUVs, when the shop door banged open. I rolled out, wiping my hands, expecting a delivery. Instead, I found 3 men standing there, not customers, not locals. These guys wore suits that were too tight and had earpieces that they didn't bother to hide. And in the middle of them was a man I recognized from the papers, Victor Calloway, Eleanor's head of security, a man rumored to be ex-mercenary, a guy who solved problems that the police couldn't touch. He looked around my shop with a sneer of absolute disgust, kicking a stray old Ken out of his way. "Mr. Thorne," Calloway said, his voice like grinding gravel, "we need to have a little chat about your influence. On Miss Isabella." I stood up, grabbing a torque wrench, just in case. "She's learning to change oil, Calloway. Hardly radicalizing her. She missed a gala rehearsal last night." Calloway stepped closer, invading my zone. "She was down here, wasn't she? Drawing pictures with your brat instead of preparing for her debut." I stepped forward, chest to chest with him. "You talk about my daughter again, and I'll show you what this wrench is for." Calloway smiled a shark smile. "You think you've won the lottery, grease monkey? You think because the old lady signed a check, you're safe? Contracts can be voided. Accidents happen. Shops catch fire. Old wiring, you know. It's a tragedy." He leaned in, whispering now. "Stay in your lane. Fix the cars. Don't touch the girl, or I will bury you under this lift and nobody will ever look for you." He turned to leave, his goons following, but he stopped at the door. "Oh, and the DB5? The one you fixed? I checked your work. Sloppy. Amateur. Just like you." They left, leaving the door swinging in the wind. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, realizing that I hadn't just signed a service contract. I had signed a declaration of war. And I was just a guy with a wrench fighting an army with silencers. But the real kicker? The real moment that changed everything? That happened 3 days later. It was the day of the Centennial Gala, the biggest event of the year for the Kensington family. The DB5 was the centerpiece. Eleanor wanted it driven onto the stage to honor her late husband. I had spent all week polishing that engine, tuning it to perfection. It was 2 p.m. The gala started at 6 o'clock. I was doing the final check when my phone rang. It was the school nurse. "Mr. Thorne, it's Sophie. She's having an attack. It's bad, Marcus. The ambulance is on its way, but you need to get here now. Sophie has severe asthma. Stress-induced." I dropped the phone. I grabbed my keys. I ran for my truck, but as I hit the ignition, a black sedan blocked the driveway. Calloway stepped out, crossing his arms. "Where do you think you're going, Thorne?" he asked, checking his watch. "The transport truck for the DB5 is 5 minutes out. You need to sign the release forms and oversee the loading. Mrs. Kensington was very specific. You leave this car, you breach the contract." "My daughter is in the hospital," I screamed, slamming the door, trying to maneuver around him. "Move the truck, Calloway. Breach of contract." That sound ... It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the storm rolling back in. It was the guttural, metallic scream of 282 horsepower waking up from a 3-year coma. I whipped my head around, and there, rolling out of Bay 2 like a silver bullet leaving. The chamber was the DB5. The engine wasn't just running. It was roaring, a mechanical symphony that I had tuned with my own 2 hands. And behind the wheel, looking small but absolutely ferocious, was Isabella. She hadn't just started the car. She was redlining it. Calloway's eyes went wide. He stepped back from my truck, his smug composure cracking for the first time. "What is she doing? That car is worth $4 million. Izzy didn't hesitate. She dropped the clutch and the Aston Martin lurched forward, tires screeching on the concrete floor, and she drove it straight at us, straight at Calloway's black sedan blocking the exit. She wasn't slowing down. Her face was set in a mask of determination that looked terrifyingly like her mother's. "Move!" I yelled, though I didn't know who I was yelling at. At the last possible second, she slammed on the brakes, the vintage nose of the DB5 stopping inches, literally inches from the driver's side door of Calloway's car. The sheer audacity of it froze everyone. The security goons reached for their waistbands, but they couldn't shoot. Not at the heiress. Not at the car. Izzy leaned out the window, her hair wild, her voice cutting through the exhaust fumes. "Get out of his way, Victor, or I swear to God, I will ram this heirloom right through your armored door." Calloway looked at her, then at the car, calculating the cost, the scandal, the wrath of Eleanor Kensington. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "Your mother will. My mother cares more about this car than she does about you," Izzy shot back, her voice shaking but loud. "Marcus, go. I'll handle the transport. Go get Sophie." I didn't waste a second. I didn't say thank you. I didn't look back. I slammed my truck into reverse, swung around Calloway's blocked sedan, which he was now frantically signaling his driver to move, and peeled out of that lot like the devil was chasing me. The drive to the hospital is a blur in my memory. A montage of running red lights and praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. When I burst through the doors, still covered in grease, smelling like fear and exhaust, the receptionist looked ready to call security, but I just screamed my daughter's name. I found her in Bay 4. She was hooked up to a nebulizer, her tiny chest heaving, fighting for every breath. The nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, told me they had stabilized her, but it was close. A severe asthma attack triggered by an allergic reaction to something at school. I sat by her bed for 6 hours, holding her hand, watching the monitors beep. Every beep was a reminder that she was alive. And every beep was also a reminder that I had just blown the biggest opportunity of my life. I had breached the contract. I had abandoned the asset. I had defied the head of security. By the time the sun went down, I knew it was over. I was back to zero. No, worse than zero. I was probably facing a lawsuit that would take the shop, the apartment, everything. Sophie woke up around 9 p.m., groggy but smiling. "Daddy," she whispered, "did you fix the princess car?" I choked back a sob, kissed her forehead, and lied. "Yeah, baby. I fixed it. It's running perfect." I stayed until she fell back asleep, then left her with Mrs. Gable, who had rushed over. To the hospital. I had to go back. I had to face the music. I couldn't hide in the AL forever. I drove back to the shop under the cover of darkness. The bay doors were open. The lights were on, but it was quiet. Too quiet. The DB5 was gone. The transport truck was gone, but sitting on my battered office chair, in the middle of the empty garage, was Victor Calloway. He was alone this time. He was smoking a cigarette, ashing it on my clean floor. "You have a lot of nerve coming back here, Thorne," he said, not standing up. "It's my shop," I said, walking over to my tool chest, checking to see if anything was stolen. "Where's the car?" "Safely at the gala. No thanks to you." He stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. "Mrs. Kensington has been informed of your desertion." She was disappointed. She expected professionalism. Instead, she got a hysterical father. "My daughter was dying," I said, my voice low. "Excuses," Calloway spat. "In our world, the job comes first. Always, but don't worry." I smoothed it over. I told her you had a mental breakdown, unstable, unfit for the contract. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. A termination notice. Sign this, he said. It acknowledges that you breached the terms, forfeiting the completion bonus and the retainer. We won't sue you for damages if you sign. You walk away with nothing, but you keep your pathetic little shop. I looked at the paper. It was a surrender. It was an admission that I was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience to them. And if I don't sign? Then I bury you. Calloway smiled, and it was the coldest thing I've ever seen. I have building inspectors on speed dial. I have IRS contacts. I can make your life a bureaucratic hell until you beg to sell this place for scrap. I picked up a pen. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Pure, white-hot rage. I thought about Izzy standing up to him. I thought about Eleanor judging me from her ivory tower. I need to get my tools from the estate, I said, putting the pen down. I left my diagnostic tablet in the passenger seat of the DB5 when I was tuning it. It has all my client data on it. I'm not signing anything until I get it back. Calloway rolled his eyes. Fine. You want to play games? Come to the service entrance of the estate. The car is backstage. Get your junk, then sign the paper. And Thorne, wear a tie. Try to look like a human being for once. I went to my apartment, put on the only suit I owned, the one I wore to Alana's funeral, and I drove up the cliff one last time, the Kensington. Estate was lit up like Versailles. Valets were parking Ferraris and Rolls-Royces. Music drifted across the lawn. I drove my rusted pickup to the service gate, where a guard waved me through with a sneer. I parked by the catering trucks and walked into the backstage area of the massive ballroom tent they had erected. It was chaos, waiters running with trays of champagne, technicians checking sound equipment. And there, in the center of the holding area, sat the DB5. It looked magnificent. But I wasn't looking at the paint. I was looking for Izzy. She wasn't there. But Calloway was. He was standing near the curtain, talking into his earpiece, looking like the king of the world. I walked over to the car, opened the passenger door, and grabbed my tablet. But as I pulled it out, I noticed something. The glove box was slightly ajar. Now, I'm a mechanic. I noticed details, gaps, misalignments. I had aligned that glove box perfectly yesterday. I opened it. Inside, tucked behind the owner's manual, was a small black device, wired into the car's electrical harness. My heart hammered. I knew what this was. It was a remote kill switch, a receiver. I traced the wire. It ran deep into the dashboard, spliced into the very fuel line I had repaired. If someone triggered this, the fuel pump would cut. The car would die on stage, in front of 500 dignitaries, and who would be blamed? The mechanic who fixed it with duct tape and integrity. It was a setup. Calloway wasn't just skimming money from the old contract. He was ensuring the new guy me failed so spectacularly that Eleanor would have no choice but to go back to his preferred vendor, the vendor who probably gave him a nice kickback. Touch anything else, and I'll break your fingers. Calloway's voice came from behind me. I stood up, holding the device. You rigged it. You were going to kill the car on stage and blame me. Calloway didn't flinch. He just stepped closer, blocking my exit. Nobody cares, Thorne. You're a liability. I'm simply managing risk. Now give me that. He reached for it. No, the voice came from the curtain. It was Eleanor Kensington. She stepped out of the shadows, wearing a gown that looked like liquid silver. She looked regal, terrifying, and furious. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Calloway. And standing right behind her was Isabella. Mrs. Kensington. Calloway's voice jumped an octave. I found this man tampering with the vehicle. He was trying to sabotage the— Stop, Eleanor said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Isabella told me everything, Victor. She told me about the shop. She told me about the threat. And she told me that you prevented Mr. Thorne from leaving to attend to his dying child. Calloway pale. Ma'am. The girl is ... emotional. She misunderstands protocol. And this? Eleanor pointed to the device in my hand. Is this protocol? I held it up. It's a kill switch, Mrs. Kensington, wired to the fuel pump. He was going to stall the car during your speech. Eleanor walked over to me, took the device, and examined it with cold precision. Then she looked at Calloway. 15 years ago, she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage, I hired you because you were ruthless. I thought I needed a monster to keep my family safe. But it seems I just invited the monster into my house. Eleanor, be reasonable, Calloway stammered, backing up. I've protected this family. You've profited from this family. Izzy stepped forward, her eyes blazing. Marcus checked the invoices, Mom. The premium parts Calloway was ordering for the fleet, they were generic. He's been pocketing the difference for years. That's why the DB5 broke down in the first place. He never serviced it, he just billed you for it. Silence. The kind of silence that screams. Eleanor looked at Calloway with absolute disgust. Get out. You're fired. And Victor? If you ever come within 10 miles of my daughter or Mr. Thorne again, I won't call the police. I will call the lawyers. And I will take everything you have. Down to the fillings in your teeth. Calloway looked at us, the billionaire, the heiress. And the grease monkey. He knew he was beaten. He straightened his jacket, tried to muster some dignity, and walked away. But as he passed me, I couldn't resist. I leaned in. Hey, Victor, you missed a spot on your shoe. He didn't look back. The tension in the room broke. Eleanor let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging just an inch. She turned to me. Mr. Thorne, she said, reverting to her business tone, though her eyes were softer. Is your daughter? She's stable, I said. She's going to be okay. Good. Send the hospital bill to my office. It will be taken care of. Consider it a ... performance bonus. I didn't finish the job, I said, my pride still stinging. I left. You prioritized your family, Eleanor said, walking over to the DB5 and running her hand along the fender. My husband. He would have done the same. He always said a man who doesn't look after his own isn't a man at all. I forgot that for a while. Thank you for reminding me. She turned to Izzy. You drove this here? Lizzie looked down at her shoes. Yeah, I might have scratched the rim, Eleanor smiled. A real smile. We can fix a rim. We can't fix a spirit. You did good, Isabella. Then, the stage manager whispered that it was time. Drive it out, Mr. Thorne, Eleanor said. I think you've earned the lap of honor. Me? I looked at my greasy hands, my cheap suit. I'm not exactly gala material. You're the one who fixed it, she said firmly. Drive. I got in. I turned. The key. The engine roared to life, smooth, powerful, perfect. I drove that $4 million car out onto the stage, the lights blinding me, the applause washing over us. I saw the faces of the elite, the wealthy, the powerful, clapping for a car they would never understand, but I wasn't looking at them. I was looking into the wings where Izzy was hugging her mom. I drove the car home that night. Well, not home, I drove it back to the garage to store it, then took my truck home. The next morning, the contract was on my desk, revised. The retainer was doubled. And there was a note attached, in elegant handwriting, for Sophie's college fund. And for the heating bill, EK life went back to normal, mostly. I'm still a mechanic. I still have grease under my nails. I still worry about the rent sometimes. But things are different. Izzy still comes by. She's actually getting pretty good at welding. Sophie is doing great. She's taking piano lessons now, paid for by a scholarship that I suspect comes. from a certain estate on the cliff. And every now and then, when the fog rolls in off the bay, I think about that night. I think about the choice between the money and the girl, between the contract and the kid. People ask me if I was scared to stand up to a guy like Calloway. Hell yes, I was. But here's the thing about being a parent, about being a person. You don't do the right thing because it's easy. You don't do it because it pays well. You do it because when you look in the mirror, or when you look into your sleeping child's eyes, you need to be able to live with the man looking back at you. We live in a world that tells us money is the only scoreboard that matters, that the Kensingtons of the world are the winners, and the Thorns are the losers. But that night I think we all learned that the scoreboard is broken. So tell me, if you were in my boots, standing in that garage with your livelihood on the line and your kid in the hospital, would you have signed that paper? Or would you have risked it all? Let me know in the comments. And hey, be kind to your mechanic. You never know when you might need a fuel line fixed in a storm. This is Marcus Thorne, signing off.